I was 20 minutes away from the orphanage when the old man collapsed at my feet and whispered that I was the only family he had left. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button real quick. Tomorrow, I'm sharing a story that'll completely change how you think about second chances. I just walked out of Meadowbrook Children's Home for the last time, my 18th birthday, marking the end of 13 years in the system. Everything I owned fit into one duffel bag and a backpack that had seen better days. The social worker, Miss Rebecca, had given me an awkward hug, handed me an envelope with $300, and wished me luck, like that would somehow be enough to survive in the real world. The bus stop was 4 blocks away, and I'd planned to take it downtown to the youth shelter where I could stay for 30 days while I figured out my next move. That was the extent of my plan. 30 days to find a job, save money, and somehow build a life from absolutely nothing. I was walking past Morrison's hardware store when I heard the crash. An elderly man had stumbled into a display of garden tools, sending rakes and shovels clattering across the sidewalk. He was maybe 75 or 80, with weathered skin that spoke of decades in the sun and hands that shook as he tried to steady himself against the brick wall. Without thinking, I dropped my bags and rushed over. "Sir, are you okay?" He looked at me with pale blue eyes that seemed unfocused, struggling to catch his breath. "I just need to sit down for a minute." I helped him to the bench outside the hardware store, noticing how light he felt, like there wasn't much left of him beneath the flannel shirt and worn jeans. His breathing was labored, wheezing with each inhale, and his lips had a faint blue tinge that scared me. "Should I call 911?" I asked, already reaching for my phone. "No," he said firmly, grabbing my wrist with surprising strength. "No hospitals. I've been in and out of them for 6 months. I know what's happening. I don't have much time left." His bluntness shocked me. People didn't usually talk about dying so matter-of-factly, especially to strangers. "There must be someone I can call," I insisted. "Family? A friend?" He studied my face with an intensity that made me uncomfortable, his eyes moving from my features to my hair to my eyes again. Then he did something that made my blood run cold. He started crying. "I can't believe it," he whispered, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. "You look just like her, just like Catherine." I had no idea who Catherine was, but the way he said the name made my chest tighten. "Who's Catherine?" I asked gently. "My daughter," he said, his voice breaking. "She died 23 years ago giving birth. The baby died too, or at least that's what they told me. But looking at you now, seeing those green eyes and that same stubborn chin, I think maybe they lied." My heart started pounding. I'd been abandoned at the hospital when I was 3 days old, left with nothing but a pink blanket and a note that said, "Her name is Emma. Please love her." No one had ever come forward. No family had ever claimed me. And I'd spent my entire childhood wondering who I looked like and where I came from. "What was your daughter's full name?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Catherine Marie," he said. "She was 17 when she got pregnant. Wouldn't tell me who the father was. Just said she was keeping the baby. We fought about it. I said terrible things about her throwing her life away. She ran away 3 months before she was due, and I never saw her alive again." He fumbled in his wallet with shaking hands and pulled out a faded photograph. The girl in the picture couldn't have been more than 16 or 17, with long dark hair, green eyes, and a smile that looked uncertain, like she wasn't sure she deserved to be happy. She was standing in front of a red barn, wearing overalls and holding a basket of tomatoes. I stared at the photo, my hands trembling. It was like looking at a version of myself from another time. Same eyes, same nose, same stubborn chin he'd mentioned. A social worker tracked me down 3 months after Catherine died, he continued, his breathing getting more labored. Told me there'd been a baby, a girl, but she died during delivery due to complications. They said Catherine had been living on the streets, malnourished and sick. The baby didn't have a chance. But what if the baby didn't die? I said, the words tumbling out. What if someone at the hospital lied or made a mistake? What if that baby ended up in the system instead? He gripped my hand tightly. What's your name? Emma, I said. Emma Rose. At least that's what the note said when they found me. Rose was Catherine's middle name before I changed it to Marie on her birth certificate, he said, fresh tears streaming down his face. She always hated Marie, said Rose was prettier. The world seemed to tilt sideways. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to kids like me. We didn't get discovered by long-lost family members. We didn't get miracle reunions. We aged out, struggled, and disappeared into statistics about poverty and homelessness. I need you to listen carefully, he said, and I could hear his breathing getting worse. My name is Thomas Fletcher. I own a farm about 15 miles east of here, 320 acres, that's been in my family for 4 generations. I have stage 4 lung cancer. The doctors gave me 3 months, but I think I've got maybe 3 weeks, if I'm lucky. He pulled a set of keys from his pocket and pressed them into my palm. I have no other family, he continued. No siblings, no cousins, nothing. I was going to let the county take the farm when I died, figured it would go to auction and some developer would turn it into subdivisions. But if there's even a chance you're Catherine's daughter, if there's even a possibility that my granddaughter survived, then everything I have should be yours. You can't just give someone you just met a farm, I protested, even as my fingers closed around the keys. I can do whatever I want with my property, he said with a weak smile. And my gut is telling me you're family. I can feel it. You have Catherine's spirit in your eyes. That same fire she had before life tried to crush it out of her. He gave me an address and the name of his lawyer, a man named Gerald Martin, who apparently had all his estate documents and medical records. Go to the farm, Thomas said. In the barn, there's a chest in the tack room. Inside, you'll find Catherine's journals, her birth certificate, photos, everything. Compare them to whatever records you have. If I'm right, if you're her daughter, then the lawyer has instructions to transfer everything to you upon my death. And if I'm not, I asked, then you'll have had a place to stay for a few weeks and some answers about a girl who deserved better than what life gave her. He squeezed my hand one last time. Either way, Emma Rose, you remind me that there's still good in this world. You stopped to help a stranger. That says everything about who you are. Before I could respond, his eyes rolled back and his body went limp. This time, I didn't ask permission. I called 911 and rode with him in the ambulance to County General, holding his hand the whole way, even though he couldn't feel it. The emergency room doctor told me, Thomas had slipped into unconsciousness due to complications from his cancer. They were keeping him comfortable, but his advance directive was clear. No extraordinary measures. He was in hospice care now, and it was just a matter of time. "Are you family?" the nurse asked me. I looked down at the keys still clutched in my hand and made a decision. "Yes," I said, "I'm his granddaughter." The lie felt like truth somehow. Or maybe it was hope disguised as certainty. They let me sit with him in the hospice room. I watched the monitors track his failing vitals and listened to his labored breathing, and I made a promise to this stranger who might be my grandfather. I would go to the farm. I would find Catherine's chest. I would discover the truth, whatever it was. Thomas Fletcher died 8 hours later without regaining consciousness. I was holding his hand when his breathing simply stopped, and for the first time in my life, I cried for someone I'd lost instead of someone who'd abandoned me. The nurse gave me privacy and information about what happens next. There would be arrangements to make, a lawyer to contact, and decisions about the property. But first, I needed to know if any of this was real or just the desperate fantasy of a dying man who saw his daughter in a stranger's face. I took a cab to the address Thomas had given me, using the last of the $300 Miss Rebecca had sent me off with. The farm was exactly where he'd said it would be, down a long gravel driveway lined with oak trees that had to be 100 years old. The house was a 2-story farmhouse, painted white with green shutters, surrounded by fields that stretched to the horizon. Behind it stood a massive red barn, its paint faded, but its structure still solid. I used the keys Thomas had given me to unlock the front door. The house smelled like coffee and old books, with furniture that was worn but well maintained. Everything was neat, organized by someone who lived alone and took pride in their space. Family photos covered the mantel above the fireplace, showing generations of Fletchers working this land, building this legacy. And there, in the center, was a portrait of Catherine. She was maybe 15 in this photo, grinning at the camera with braces on her teeth and dirt on her face, holding a ribbon from some kind of farming competition. She looked happy in a way the other photo hadn't captured, like the world hadn't broken her yet. I walked through the house in a daze, touching things that might have been touched by my mother, standing in rooms where she might have laughed and cried and dreamed about her future. In her bedroom, which Thomas had clearly preserved exactly as she'd left it, I found posters of bands from the early 2000s, a bookshelf full of young adult novels, and a desk covered in drawings of horses and landscapes. But I didn't let myself believe. Not yet. I needed proof, and that proof was supposedly waiting in the barn. The tack room was exactly where Thomas said it would be, a small enclosed space at the back of the barn that smelled like leather and hay. The chest was made of cedar, with Catherine's initials carved into the lid. Inside, I found her life carefully preserved by a father who'd never stopped grieving. There were journals, dozens of them, chronicling her childhood and teenage years. Photo albums showing her growing up on this farm, learning to ride horses and drive tractors and help with harvest. And there, in a manila envelope labeled Important Documents, I found her birth certificate, her Social Security card, and her medical records from the pregnancy. My hands shook as I read through the hospital records from County General, the same hospital where I'd been abandoned 3 days after my birth. Catherine had checked in under a fake name Sarah Martinez, claiming she had no family and no permanent address. She'd been malnourished, anemic, and showing signs of preeclampsia. The delivery had been complicated, resulting in an emergency C-section. According to the official records, both mother and baby had died due to complications. But there was a handwritten note paper-clipped to the file, something that looked like it had been added later. Baby transferred to social services per JM directive. Mother expired at 0400 hours. JM, someone with those initials, had decided to tell Thomas Fletcher his daughter and grandchild were both dead, while actually placing the baby into foster care. But why? Why would someone lie about something so important? I kept digging through the chest and found more journals, these ones from after Catherine ran away. She'd written about being scared, about not knowing how to be a mother, about wanting to go home but being too proud to admit she'd made mistakes. The entries stopped 3 weeks before I was born, but there was one final letter sealed in an envelope addressed to my baby. I opened it with trembling hands. "My dearest daughter," it began, "if you're reading this, then something went wrong and I didn't make it. I'm so sorry. I wanted to be your mother more than I've ever wanted anything, but life hasn't been kind to me lately, and I'm scared I won't survive bringing you into this world." The letter continued, Catherine writing about her hopes and dreams for her daughter, about regretting the fight with her father, about wishing she'd been brave enough to go home. She wrote about picking the name Emma Rose because it meant whole and beautiful, and she wanted her daughter to be both of those things, even if life tried to convince her otherwise. "I've made arrangements," she wrote. "If something happens to me, a social worker named Janet Morrison has promised to make sure you go to a good family, somewhere you'll be loved and safe. I know your grandfather would take you, but he's old and set in his ways, and I'm worried he'd see you as a reminder of everything he lost instead of everything beautiful you could become. Forgive me for not being strong enough to raise you. Forgive me for all the ways I failed before I even had a chance to try." Janet Morrison, J.M., the social worker who'd decided to tell my grandfather we were both dead instead of giving him the chance to raise me. What comes next is something I never saw coming. Stick with me and make sure you subscribe. I sat in that tack room surrounded by evidence of my mother's life, and I felt rage building in my chest. Someone had stolen 13 years from both me and my grandfather. Someone had decided we were better off thinking each other were dead instead of giving us the chance to be family. And that someone had a name. I called the lawyer, Gerald Martin, from Thomas's house phone. He answered on the second ring, his voice professional but warm. "Martin and Associates." "My name is Emma Rose," I said. "Thomas Fletcher told me to call you before he died." There was a long pause. "Thomas passed away?" 8 hours ago at County General. He gave me keys to his farm and told me to find Catherine's chest in the barn. I found it, Mr. Martin, and I think I'm Catherine's daughter." "Oh, my God," he breathed. "Thomas thought you might be, but he wasn't sure. He changed his will 3 years ago, leaving everything to Catherine's child if she ever surfaced. But we had no way to find you, no way to even know if you existed." Over the next hour, I told him everything about being found at the hospital, about the note, about spending my childhood in foster care, about the documents in Catherine's chest that proved someone had lied about my death. Gerald listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he was silent for a long moment. "This is a lawsuit waiting to happen," he finally said. "But more importantly, this is a wrong that needs to be made right. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning? We need to compare your birth records with Catherine's medical files, and I need to start the process of transferring Thomas's estate to you." "How long will that take?" I asked. "Normally, several months. But given the circumstances and the fact that Thomas prepared for this possibility, maybe 6 to 8 weeks. In the meantime, you have his permission to live at the farm. He put that in writing years ago, a provision that any potential heir could reside on the property during the probate process. I spent that first night in the farmhouse, sleeping in Catherine's childhood bed, wrapped in quilts that still smelled faintly of lavender. I dreamed about a mother I'd never known, a young girl who'd been so scared and alone that she'd convinced herself giving me up was an act of love. I dreamed about Thomas, working these fields alone for decades, mourning a daughter and granddaughter he thought were lost forever, and I dreamed about the life that had been stolen from both of us by someone's decision to lie. The next morning, I met with Gerald Martin in his office downtown. He was in his 60s, with kind eyes and a grandfatherly manner that immediately put me at ease. He'd brought in a genealogist and a medical records specialist to help verify my identity, and over the next 3 hours, we pieced together the truth. My hospital records from the foster system matched perfectly with the date and hospital where Catherine had given birth. My blood type was consistent with being her child, and, most damning of all, the handwriting on my abandonment note matched samples of Catherine's handwriting from her journals. She'd written that note herself, probably in the hours before she died, wanting me to know she'd loved me even if she couldn't stay. "You are absolutely Catherine Fletcher's daughter," Gerald said, sliding a document across his desk, "which makes you Thomas Fletcher's sole heir and the legal owner of Fletcher Farm, pending the completion of probate." The farm was worth approximately $2.3 million, he explained. The land alone was valued at $7,000 per acre, and there was farm equipment, livestock, and a substantial savings account that Thomas had accumulated over his lifetime of careful management and frugal living. He never spent money on himself, Gerald said. He lived simply, saved everything, and maintained the farm in perfect condition. I think part of him always hoped Catherine would come home, and he wanted everything to be ready for her. But there was more. Gerald had already filed complaints with the state's social services department regarding Janet Morrison's actions. After some investigation, they discovered she'd falsified documents in at least 4 other cases, separating children from potential family members for reasons that were still unclear. She'd been fired 6 years earlier after an unrelated scandal, but the damage she'd done continued to ripple through lives she'd touched. "We may never know why she lied to Thomas," Gerald said, "but we can make sure no one else is hurt by her actions, and we can make sure you get what should have been yours from the beginning." The next 2 months were a blur of legal proceedings, paperwork, and learning what it meant to own a farm. Thomas's neighbors, the Martinez family, had been maintaining the property and caring for the livestock in the weeks since he'd entered hospice. They welcomed me like family, teaching me about irrigation schedules and crop rotation, and the million small details that kept a farm running. Maria Martinez, who was close to my age, became my first real friend. She taught me to drive the tractor, helped me understand the business side of farming, and shared stories about Thomas that made me wish I'd found him sooner. He was a good man, she told me one afternoon as we mended fences together. Quiet, but generous. When my dad broke his leg 2 years ago and couldn't work, Thomas hired him as a consultant and paid him full wages to just sit and talk about farming. He found ways to help people without making them feel like charity cases. I learned that Thomas had been respected throughout the community, known for his integrity and his skill with the land. The farm had been profitable every year for the past 3 decades, and he'd modernized where it made sense while preserving traditional methods that worked. And slowly, I began to understand what he'd given me. Not just land or money, but a legacy, a place where I belonged, where my roots went deep into soil that generations of my family had worked. Every fence post, every tree, every building represented someone's labor and love. The day the probate finally cleared and the farm became officially mine, I drove to the cemetery where Thomas had been buried next to his wife, Eleanor, who died when Catherine was just 7 years old. I brought flowers and sat on the grass, telling him about everything I'd learned and everything I planned to do with the gift he'd given me. I'm going to take care of it, I promised. I'm going to honor what you and Catherine and all the Fletchers before you built here. And someday, when I have kids of my own, I'll tell them about the grandfather who gave a stranger on the street his entire world because he chose to believe in family and second chances. I enrolled in agricultural management classes at the community college and joined the local farmers cooperative. I hired the Martinez family to work the farm with me, creating a partnership that benefited all of us. And I started the Catherine Fletcher Memorial Scholarship, using part of Thomas's savings to help young mothers finish their education and support their children. Every day I found something new that connected me to my mother, her love of sunrise, evidenced by journal entries about watching the light spread across the fields, her talent for gardening, shown in the elaborate flower beds she'd designed around the farmhouse, her stubborn determination to do things right, even when they were hard. I also found connections to Thomas, his methodical approach to problem solving, documented in decades of farm journals he'd kept, his quiet generosity revealed through letters from people he'd helped over the years, his unshakable belief that land was something you borrowed from future generations, not something you owned. 1 year after that morning, when an old man collapsed at my feet, I stood in the same spot outside Morrison's hardware store. The owner, Mr. Peterson, had installed a small plaque on the bench where Thomas had sat during his final conscious moments. It read, "In memory of Thomas Fletcher, farmer, friend, and believer in second chances." I traced the letters with my finger, remembering how terrified I'd been that day, walking away from the only home I'd known with no plan and no hope. I'd thought my life was ending, that aging out of foster care meant falling into the abyss of poverty and struggle that claimed so many kids like me. Instead, I'd found family, not in the traditional sense of being raised together, but in the deep knowledge that I came from people who'd loved this land, who'd worked with their hands, who'd believed that what we build matters and who we love echoes through generations. The farm taught me that belonging isn't about where you started, but about where you choose to put down roots. It taught me that family can find you in the most unexpected moments, and that sometimes the greatest gifts come from people who only knew you for minutes, but saw you clearly enough to trust you with their entire legacy. I still think about Catherine sometimes, about the scared 17-year-old girl who made an impossible choice. I wish I could tell her that I turned out okay, that her daughter found her way home even though it took 18 years. I wish she could see the flowers blooming in the garden she designed, could walk through the barn where her journals waited to be found, could know that her father never stopped loving her or hoping she'd come back. But mostly, I think about Thomas, about that moment when he looked at me and saw his daughter's eyes staring back at him, about how he'd spent his final hours making sure a stranger would be cared for, just in case that stranger was family, about how he'd chosen hope over resignation, connection over isolation, and belief over cynicism. He gave me everything he had, and in return I gave him something he'd lost 23 years earlier. Proof that Catherine's life had mattered, that her daughter had survived, and that the Fletcher legacy would continue into the next generation. The farm is mine now. 320 acres of fertile soil, a farmhouse full of memories, and a barn where my mother's dreams still echo in the silence. It's not the life I imagined when I walked out of Meadowbrook Children's Home with everything I owned in 2 bags. It's better than anything I could have imagined. Because I'm not just Emma Rose anymore, the foster kid with no history and no future. I'm Emma Rose Fletcher, 4th-generation farmer, keeper of my family's legacy, and living proof that sometimes the universe conspires to put the right people in the right place at exactly the right moment. And when I sit on that bench outside Morrison's hardware store, watching the sun set over the town that's become my home, I can almost hear Thomas's voice on the wind, telling me he knew I was family the moment he saw me, telling me he never doubted I'd take care of what he'd built, telling me that sometimes the best family is the one that finds you when you're walking away from everything you've ever known, carrying hope in your pocket and nothing else to your name. Thank you so much for listening to Emma's story about unexpected family and impossible second chances. If this touched your heart, please hit that subscribe button. It helps us keep sharing these stories of hope and resilience. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever had a chance encounter that changed your entire life? Have you discovered family in unexpected places? Share your stories with our community. And before you go, click on one of the 2 stories on your screen. Each one is about ordinary people facing extraordinary moments and choosing not to give up. See you in the next one.